The way that you're treated in prison, you're treated as if you deserve to be punished even more. And when I say that, we send people to prison as punishment and not for punishment. And I've had correctional officers tell me, why should I treat you good when you broke the law? And like, I'm already here. Like, what more do you want from me? Initially, I decided to participate in the program because I believed that it would get me out of jail faster. And I said, hey, this might look good for, on parole. Let me just do it. I was paired with a person who had been a victim of robbery. I didn't know anything about this person except that it was a woman and that she had been a crime victim. And I'm assigned the table, and as I walk through to the table, I finally, I see Susan for the first time. She had I remember she had a flowery sundress, and she was just sitting at the table playing with her nails. And I walked up, hey, how you doing? My name is Johnny Perez. I didn't know whether I should shake my hand or not, reach out to shake her hand or not. Human touch is really forgiven inside of prison, so I erred on the side of just saying hi without extending my hand. And I sat down, and it was just quiet. For like the first 5 minutes, just quiet. Either person not knowing who should start the conversation, and I decided to start. I said, hey, I don't know what they told you about me, and just try to tell a little bit about me. I said, I've been in here, for 8 years now. I've been here for like 8 years now. You probably know this already, but I was convicted of robbery in the first degree. The whole time that I'm telling her, she's not looking up at me. I mentioned the fact that I had a daughter, that I was, a father, and then at that, she raised her head and also mentioned that she was also a parent, and we talked about what it means to be a parent for a while, about what do we want for our kids, and, some commonalities around safety, around loving our kids and showing them in the right direction and things like that, and a lot of what she said that she wanted for her kids were a lot of what my mother said she wanted for me. And I found those parallels, and after a while, this woman was more than just a woman who was sitting across from me. She resembled my mother in a lot of different ways. Eventually, we came around to having a conversation about why I was in prison. Up until this point, we hadn't talked about her experience. It was just basically focused on me. And she had questions, She wanted to know details about my crime, which up until that point, I had not spoken about outside of court. And even then was just me accepting a plea bargain. So I gave her like the play-by-play of the night in which I was arrested, And when I got to the point where I actually walked inside of a convenience store and I pulled out the gun, she cried. Began to cry, I should say. And I said, hey, do you want me to stop? She said, no, I need to hear this, And, one of the difficult questions she asked me was, how does it feel to hold a gun to somebody? And it didn't feel good. It didn't feel good. And I almost felt like I wanted to say I'm sorry to her for the crime that I committed to someone else. And in the end, I did, and then I wanted to switch the focus because it got heavy in there. I said, can you talk to me a little bit about what brings you here? She told me a story about her, like how she was victimized and how she was carjacked violently, pulled out of her car at gunpoint, left on the side of the road, and as she's explaining it, I'm thinking about, wow, like this could be my mother. What if somebody did that to my mother? What if somebody put a gun to my mother and said, get out of the car? How would I feel? And I think that was the first time, man, in my life, man, I did a lot of harm when I really said, like, this is not you. Like, this is not you. You're not a monster. You're not this, like, you're not this threat. Like, people should feel safe around you. People do feel safe around you, you know. I was reading a lot of books centered on philosophy back then, and I said, hey, have you ever forgiven that person? You know? And she said no, you know? And we had this conversation, like, is true forgiveness possible, and what would that look like? You know, and I don't think that we arrived somewhere, you know, but we definitely arrived at a point where we both realized that being able to forgive someone else gives us the opportunity to move on, you know. You know, at the end of the conversation, she, I mean, it was like we were both crying. At some point, when we did touch hands, you know, was because we were both in tears, and, you know, I felt the need to try to, like, console her. I wish that I would have been able to, like, rub her back and stuff like that, but that's not allowed in prison. It definitely wasn't allowed in that program at all. And ultimately, like, she gave me a hug at the end, and it felt good to be hugged. It felt good to be hugged, but it felt even better to be hugged by her, you know, because I felt that I had did harm to her, even though I didn't. I felt like I was that person who snatched her up. You know, I felt like shit. You know, and to have her hug me really tightly, man, it just, like, really, you know, she said that I freed her, man, but, you know, like, she also freed me in a lot of different ways too.